On today's Locked On Giants podcast, we're wrapping up our 2024 New York Giants opponent previews with a look at the Carolina Panthers. Joining us will be Schuyler Callihan, who is the site publisher of the Panthers site for Panthers on SI. That's coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. The playoffs might be in the books and might start sporting the way we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Chain, a credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for Giants on SI. Find my written work over at si.com/NFL/Giants. And welcome on into my everydayers, my Blue Crew community members, and of course, everybody in between. Don't forget to subscribe and like the channel, like this video. It is all appreciated. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, we are winding down our look at the New York Giants 2024 regular season opponents. And we have up a team that underwent a lot of change this past off season, the Carolina Panthers. And here to help me break all that down is Schuyler Callihan. He is the publisher of the Carolina Panthers site. It's Carolina Panthers on SI. Same as the Giants URL. It's si.com/NFL/Panthers, I believe. So you can find his work over there. And Schuyler, thank you so much for popping on in to talk Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. I feel like I've done this a million times when it comes to talking about coaching changes, GM changes. I think this is year 5 of me covering the Panthers. We've covered 3 coaching changes, 2 GMs. It's a lot of change.
So you're used to this. You're an
Yes.
all-pro at this. So
Unfortunately.
yeah, and Giant fans think they have it bad. So anyway,
Yeah.
Schuyler, let's start off with the coaching changes. You know, Dave Canales, I think, was a surprise. Was he a surprise hire in your mind?
I think initially, yeah, he was, because everyone kind of had their eyes on some of the bigger coordinators. Ben Johnson was a guy that David Tepper was really tied to for a couple of years. Obviously, he decided to stay put in Detroit, but I think he was kind of an under the radar guy that no one really thought, is he really quite ready to be a head coach? He only had been an offensive coordinator 1 year, but he spent all those years in Seattle and really helped get the best out of Russell Wilson, got the best out of Geno Smith. And we saw what we did with Baker last year. And I think really David Tepper looked at that situation, said, you know what? We're going to tear this thing down. We're to go to a younger, more energetic coach that thinks positive, that believes in our quarterback, and that be the guy that can be around here for the next 20 or 25 years. As maybe different as it looks on the outside, David Tepper does want to keep the same guys around as long as possible. And he's talked about it in, his other business ventures, that really a lot of his main people, they stick around him for a long, long time. So this kind of changing of the guard constantly in the NFL, it's kind of a new thing for him. And he's kind of tired of washing his hands clean after every offseason or every 2 years and finding a new coach, new GM. He wants to build somebody. He even said, like, hey, this next head coach, I hope they're speaking at my funeral. So that's how much he thinks of really Dave Canales and his whole new regime.
All right, now, Schuyler, let's talk about the new coordinators, because obviously, starting from scratch, let's start on the offensive side of the ball. How is this offense going to be different than what we may have seen in the past from the Panthers?
Yeah, so really with Dave Canales and Brad Idzik, they've been, hand in hand to get together for a long, long time now, dating back to their days in Seattle. But this is an offense that's going to really rely on the running game, and that's what they got away from last year. And I think that's really the kind of the calling card of what the issues were last year offensively. They tried to spread it out, go to this offensive attack that really didn't fit the personnel. We saw left tackle Ike Ekwonu have a ton of struggles. in that system. He's not going to have that kind of issues with this system because this is an offense that's going to be predicated on getting the ball out quick. Dave Canales talks about getting it out in 2.7 seconds or less. He's very specific about it. So you take that into account. You take into account all the different running backs they have in the mix now. They added Jonathan Brooks. They added Rashad Penny, already having Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard. They're going to run the football. That's going to be their calling card. They're going to live by it, die by it, and Bryce Young will just be asked to do his job instead of having to feel like he's got to carry the whole offense, which even though the numbers didn't say that, that's kind of what the pressure felt like for him last year.
I was just going to ask you about Bryce Young. I was going to ask you if obviously so far hasn't quite maybe peaked the way I think they were looking for, various reasons for that. But, do you think taking some of this pressure off of Bryce Young will help him to maybe take the next step in his development?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I was one that actually had CJ Stroud as my preferred choice for the Panthers last year. I thought that he was the better fit. Frank Reich, we kind of hear some rumblings about that was his pick, but I wasn't necessarily out on Bryce Young. I think really the only thing that I questioned was, can this kid take a beating week after week? Well, he answered that because he got sacked 62 times last year. That's not counting all the knockdowns and everything else. So he answered the one and only question that I had. And really it's just about surrounding him with better talent, whether that's up front, the offensive line. They got Damian Lewis, Robert Hunt. They spent over $150 million fixing the interior of that line. They got him some more weapons to work with now. It just feels like a better system, a better support system, not only personnel-wise, but a coaching staff that really believes in him too. We didn't know what really Frank Reich and Thomas Brown, their vision was for Bryce Young, really that offense last year. We were asking Frank Reich, towards the end of his short tenure, what's the identity of this offense? And week after week, he's just like, we're figuring it out as we go. And that's not necessarily what Dave Canales and this staff have done. They've got a very clear vision of what they want this thing to look like. And I think we've already kind of seen that early on here in the spring portion of practice.
Do you feel, though, that they do have the personnel to fulfill Canales' vision?
Yeah, I think it's still a work in progress. I mean, anytime you are 2-15, it's hard to rebuild that thing overnight. So yeah, I mean, I think they definitely fixed the number one issue, which was that interior pressure that they were giving up constantly last year. I believe they started like 11 or 12 different combinations up front. So that's problem number one. Last year, the receivers couldn't get open. That was a big issue. They didn't really have that extensive of a route tree. And there was one game, may have been the Tennessee or Jacksonville game, where it just felt like all they were running were four curls every single play. That's all they were doing because they couldn't get separation. You add Deontay Johnson, who's maybe one of the best separators in the entire league. Drops have kind of been an issue for him, but he can get open. Xavier Legette, the rookie, is extremely fast for his size, kind of compares to an A.J. Brown type of player. So they fixed that. And now it's all about getting the tight ends involved, which has kind of been a lacking part of this offense for the last 4 or 5 years.
What's your remaining biggest concern about the Panthers offense based on what you've seen so far?
I would say probably depth, and maybe even the receiving spot. So I'll start with the receivers first. There's obviously a lot to be excited about. You have Deontay Johnson, like I said. Adam Thielen's in the mix, but Adam Thielen at some point, Father Time's going to catch up to him. Right? He's not going to get that 100-yard or 100 receptions, 1,000-yard type season every year. He's going to take a step back. Deontay Johnson's kind of Mr. Inconsistent. You don't really know what you're going to get with him on a week in and week out basis. And can you really put much pressure on Xavier Legette? I mean, on tape and when you see him in person, he looks the part, but he's going to be a rookie. When you look back at his college tape and his college production, he really only had that one blow-up year this past year at South Carolina. So there's still a lot of question marks around that receiving group, even with the tight end group. But the depth along the offensive line, they fixed, like I said, the starting line with Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. But if any of those guys go down, you're back to virtually the same guys that were the problem a year ago. So establishing that depth is going to take a little bit of time, and hopefully those guys can just stay healthy up front for at least 15, 16 games.
All right, we're talking with Schuyler Callihan. He is the publisher of the Carolina Panthers site, on SI. When we come back, we're going to talk about changes to the defense, including how the Panthers are going to progress without a certain edge rusher that the Giants were able to acquire. So don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans. Major League Baseball and the WNBA are in full swing right now. And before you know it, the NHL, the NBA, and NFL seasons will be here as well. But here's the good news. While we wait for those leagues to start up, FanDuel is here year round with opportunities to dream up bets anytime on anything in the sports world. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to fanduel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and my special guest today is Schuyler Callihan, who is the publisher of the Carolina Panthers on SI site. You can find his work at si.com/NFL/Panthers. They do a great job over there. So I highly recommend you also check out their work, especially as we get a little closer to the game. And Schuyler, let's talk about the Panthers defense. We'll start off with obviously a new defensive coordinator. What changes most in terms of the scheme that they're planning to run?
Well, this is the good part. So with the whole coaching change, they were actually able to keep this whole defensive side of the ball intact, coaching staff-wise, from Ejiro Evero all the way down to the position coaches. That's kind of a rarity in the NFL. Usually when you see a new head coach come in, they're going to wipe the whole slate clean and bring in their own guys. It was very key for Dave Canales to keep Ejiro Evero and that defensive staff together after seeing what they did a year ago. And he's considered one of the up-and-coming coaches. He's going to be an NFL head coach within the next 1 or 2 years. So not a whole lot is going to change schematically. But as far as personnel goes, yeah, a lot's changed, especially with that front seven. They don't really have maybe the depth necessary in the back end and that secondary. But, yeah, it's going to be pretty unique of how they try to get after the passer, as you mentioned before the break, with Brian Burns no longer being in the mix.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about Brian Burns. There's been a lot of talk about, his time down in Carolina. I think he had one season where he had double-digit sacks, but correct me if I'm wrong, he never really had a true, number two next to him to take some of the pressure off. And if I'm not mistaken, that allowed the opponent to really focus in on him. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he had the one season where the Panthers brought in Hassan Reddick, but at that point, Derek Brown really wasn't a finished product, and he still kind of isn't, as crazy as that is to say, with the year he just put up. But at that time, Derek Brown wasn't a finished product. Hassan Reddick was kind of an unknown commodity at that point. He had a good season with the Cardinals the year before, but no one really knew what he was made of. And Brian Burns – you look at the production that he had last year, everyone will say, he only had 8 sacks. It wasn't quite a big year. Well, you got to consider, the Panthers were trailing in the third quarter of games almost every single week. He didn't have the opportunity to rush after the passer because everyone was handing the ball off. So to me, I think it was still an impressive year. And you got to think, too, at the beginning of that year, he was still in contract negotiations with the Panthers. And you don't know how much players kind of take that into effect mentally, and maybe I'm not accusing Brian Burns of taking plays off by any means because I didn't see that on tape, but you got to wonder how much was that in his head? Like, hey, I want to make sure I don't get hurt while I'm out here trying to get this next contract. But I think he's going to be a great fit for Giants fans. Or for the Giants. So I'm sure that's going to excite the fans listening to this, but for Carolina, I've kind of always thought they've approached this in the Moneyball theory here, and they've recreated Brian Burns in the aggregate. You're not going to go get another Brian Burns. So in order to kind of make up for that production, they go get Jadeveon Clowney, they get DJ Wanham, they get Caleb on Chase on. You take those 3 guys' production, you put them together, kind of equates to what you get with Brian Burns. Now, obviously, it's going to hurt not having a guy like Burns off the edge, having that presence, but you have a little bit of a deeper edge rushing group than you did a year ago. And probably this might be the deepest edge rushing group they've had since maybe David Tepper's took taken over the ownership of this team.
So, I mean, the question that needs to be answered is, did they trade Burns way because of the contract? And it's interesting because they turned down 2 number ones from the Rams, I believe it was a year ago. And here they are, they turn around and they trade Burns to the Giants for a second rounder and a fifth rounder the following year. I mean, what changed?
So this is the thing that really irks Panthers fans, right? I mean, you had the opportunity to send him away, and actually the Rams called twice, 2 years in a row about this, and they said no. And that was Scott Fitter, that was at the GM at the time. And when the changing of the guard happened, Dan Morgan was all ears. He was looking to bring Brian back, but was open to any possibilities via trade. And obviously we've kind of seen the leaks come out over the last couple of weeks. He kind of asked, hey, two number ones for Brian, and that was kind of joked off. I think the Panthers lost all of their leverage when he entered that contract year, because you don't have a guy that is under control for multiple years anymore. 2 years ago, you had all the leverage in the world, but now you have a guy that's going into a year where he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. It's tough to kind of play to other GMs. So Dan Morgan, in my opinion, got the most value, or milked the most value that he possibly could, considering the circumstances. And they were able to kind of get some of that that picks back that they kind of wasted away. They got a future number 2 in the draft for next year that they didn't have, so they were able to get that back from the Chicago trade to get Bryce Young. So they were able to make up some ground. But yeah, I think it was, they didn't want to pay a pass rusher $30 million a year in the situation they're in, right? You don't want to start just throwing tons of money at a pass rusher when you're in a rebuild. So I think that was kind of the number one thing for them.
When you look at this Panthers defense, where is the biggest concern for you right now?
You would think pass rusher, but I would say cornerback is the number one concern. J.C. Horn is phenomenal when he's on the field, but he's not on the field enough. And outside of him, you have Dane Jackson, who they brought in from Buffalo. He was a part-time starter, part-time role player. And after that, it's a bunch of question marks. They tried to bring in Stephon Gilmore. They've had kind of talks with him throughout the offseason. I don't know that they're going to be able to quite match the asking price that he's willing to come in at. They don't have a whole lot of cap space. So cornerback's a real sore spot for me. And it's probably not something they're going to be able to address until next offseason, unless they find somebody that slips through the cracks at the end of roster cuts, at the end of training camp and preseason, or if they can find somebody they can pick up off waivers. But cornerback's 1,000% the number one sore spot.
Let's go back to the defensive front for a moment. If I remember correctly, in addition to having had Brian Burns for the last few years, that defensive front wasn't all that bad. I mean, do you still feel pretty good about it?
Yeah, I think they actually improved it, because, last year they had Yetur Gross-Matos was playing a position he had never played in his life. I talked to him about it last year, because he was always a 4-3 defensive end, was converted to a 3-4 outside linebacker. It looked like he was a giraffe on skates the first month or so. And then he eventually kind of caught up to speed. He looked okay and actually played pretty well against the run. But now you're adding bigger, bulkier guys in that front seven. And Sean Robinson, Shy Tuttle was there last year. He's got a year under his belt. They get Josie Jewell from the Denver Broncos at linebacker. It just feels like it's more guys that are, I guess, fit for Agero's scheme, compared to last year, where it was just a couple of guys that fit. Now you got Derek Brown, Sean Robinson, Shy Tuttle. That's a big three that you're going to have to mess with.
Yeah, Sean Robinson, of course, with the Giants last year, really good, run stuffer, did some, managed to get some penetration, basically took over after the Giants traded away Leonard Williams. So, and played well, but one and done for the Giants, now a member of the Carolina Panthers. All right. We are talking with Schuyler Callihan, who is the publisher of the Carolina Panthers on SI site. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Panthers draft class and the storylines that maybe we're not talking about or paying enough attention to that maybe we should, as we draw closer to the start of training camp and the 2024 regular season. So please don't go anywhere. All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Petrina, and my guest today is Schuyler Callihan. He is the publisher of the Carolina Panthers on SI. Find him at si.com/NFL/Panthers. They are the sister site, obviously, to the Giants site that I run over on SI. So thank y'all for tuning in. And Schuyler, let's talk about the Panthers draft class. Now, obviously, golden opportunity, because of the trade, it didn't quite work out. But overall, tell us about the Panthers draft class. Do you feel good about this class, or are you kind of like on the fence with them?
Surprisingly, it's a pretty impressive class, in my opinion, compared to, maybe what they had to work with going into it. You didn't have a first round pick going into the draft. They were able to flip up into that final spot and get Xavier Legette, which was a really smart move by Dan Morgan, in my opinion. You're able to get that fifth year option on the contract of a receiver. You knew you were going to take a receiver at the very first pick of the second round. You might as well move up into that next spot, get the fifth year of control as an option, and get Legette, who's going to be somebody that I think is a hidden gem in this class. There's a lot of receiver talent in this 24 class, but he may be one of the best ones when it's all said and done. Again, like I said earlier, he's getting comps to A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, maybe not quite a DK Metcalf, but he's that bigger, faster receiver that's kind of becoming more of a piece in this offense or in the NFL that's kind of becoming more attractive. So he's going to be maybe Bryce Young's number one option at some point this season. I don't know that it'll happen September, October, but as the months get colder, he's going to be arguably his number one option. Moving to Jonathan Brooks, second round pick. I was a little confused by this one at first. You already have Miles Sanders. You're paying a bunch of money to. You have Chuba Hubbard. You have Raheem Blackshear. They didn't have Penny at this point, but you go and get a guy that is coming off an ACL injury. Like I said, you're probably not going to count on him a lot, but I felt that they could have took a center there. That's an interesting spot for them where they passed on Zach Frazier. They passed on Jackson Powers-Johnson. They passed on cornerbacks to go get a running back, something that they already had, but they feel very good about him. They feel like he's the best running back in this class. I know other teams felt the same way. So once he gets integrated, that's probably going to be one of the guys to watch for in this class.
What about, some of the names we're not talking about, or, that you think are flying under the radar?
Well, I think in that draft class, specifically, Jatavian Sanders is an interesting guy, tight end that is, in my opinion, probably the best sure-handed guy in that tight end room the day he stepped foot in Carolina. Now, as far as the blocking goes and everything else, that's going to be a work in progress. He's nowhere near a finished product. He's going to be somebody that's going to be a bit of a project, but he's somebody they can throw out there in the slot. They can run some two tight end personnels out there to get him on the field, to get him some action. But as far as away from the draft class, offensively, I would go with probably, a Chuba Hubbard. This is a guy that took over that starting role as the starting running back a year ago from Miles Sanders. Didn't have a great year. He still averaged 3.8 yards per carry, but when you're running behind that offensive line, I don't know how much success you can expect to have. So he's got that full year of starting under his belt. I think he's somebody that you want to watch on the offensive side.
So I guess if I were to ask you what your biggest concern overall for the Panthers is, it would be the offensive line. Would I be correct?
I think the depth of the offensive line is the question, because I think the starting five is much, much better than it was a year ago. I would say the biggest concern offensively would probably be maybe more player specific in Ikem Ekwonu. This is year 3 for him. Year 1 was really slow out the gates, and then he started to find his rhythm. And then year 2, they went to, again, that spread offensive attack. It didn't really fit him. It put him on an island way too much, put way too much pressure on his plate. This is the year where it's got to really, for him, he's got to turn the corner, because that 4th year is going to come up, and then you're going to have that decision on the 5th year option. The Panthers have to protect Bryce Young. Ikem Ekwonu is a big part of that. If he can't get it done sooner than later, they're going to look for replacement.
Overall, Schuyler, what are your expectations for the Panthers in the first year of Dave Canales' tenure?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're a little higher than probably most would expect. I think 5-12, 6-11 is absolutely realistic. I mean, the reality is this team went 2-15 a year ago and had 5 one-score games. And if they just had a competent offense, they probably could have won 3, maybe 4 of those 5 one-score games. So you fix the offensive line, you get more weapons, you have an offensive coaching staff that's fully aligned. That makes a whole big difference. Last year, you had Frank Reich and his offensive scheme. You had Thomas Brown coming from the Sean McVay tree. You had an offensive line coach that was from a different offense as well. It was just way too many cooks in the kitchen. That's a phrase that we've continued to hear in Carolina for the last year. This is all a coaching staff that's all on the same page, all aligned. It makes sense. They're presenting a clear picture, not only to Bryce Young, but to everybody on that offensive side of the ball. And I feel like that alone will help get them a couple more wins too. So I would say 5 to 6 wins is probably about the sweet spot for this team.
And then for any people listening who happen to be Panthers fans, do you think David Tepper will be patient with this regime?
Yeah, I can't necessarily say yes because we haven't seen that play out just yet. But like I said, I think he knew he made a mistake last year with Frank Reich. Frank Reich was not ready to take another NFL coaching job. I mean, he was mentally exhausted, and you could see it wiped across his face every day that he stepped in and talked to us after practice or after a game. You could just see he just needed a break from the NFL. That Colts job really kind of put it in for him, and I think he needed to take a year off before getting back into it. Now, who knows? He may never coach or be a head coach in the NFL again. But I think he kind of knew early on that, hey, I tried to overdo it here. I tried to get the best head coach available with the most experience, the guy that's been kind of a quarterback whisperer in years past, and bring in all these top-notch coordinators and coaches that even though they may not come from the same background, we're going to go get them anyway. That's a totally different vision from what he had this time around when he went and got Dave Canales, who said, you know what, I'm going to go get the young, energetic coach that's had some great success with quarterbacks, and I'm going to take whatever he says and apply it to the rest of the coaching staff. We're going young, energetic, and fully aligned, and I think that's what they're going to do. I think they're going to let this thing go out. They're going to let this play out together, Dave Canales and Bryce Young, and see if they can grow. And if not, then maybe they both exit at the same time.
All I know is, we in New York think that, we have it bad with the struggles and stuff like that. It can always be worse, I suppose.
Yes.
But it's interesting. The Giants and Panthers are going to play in Germany, which I was not surprised to see. I were you surprised that was the game that they picked?
I kind of was. I'd been hearing rumors that it was going to be the Chiefs and maybe another team that was kind of in the mix, but I was a little bit surprised. I am a little bit bummed, though, that the NFL put it the week that did, because that's the week that we're expecting our little girl to come. So I'm not going to be able to make the trip over to Germany. But, it's all safe travels to everyone over there. Hopefully I'll get back over there for one someday soon.
Yeah, actually, I think they chose that game because the Giants were awarded the German market. So the second I saw that, I said, that's going to be the game. So that was right there. But anyway, Schuyler, appreciate all the great info. It's always good catching up with you. He is Schuyler Callihan, the site publisher of Carolina Panthers on SI. Check his work out at si.com/NFL/Panthers. You can also check out my written work, like I said, at si.com/NFL/Giants. And of course, make sure you're checking out all our Locked On hosts who do a great job. We're all coming back from vacation and whatnot, so we'll be cranking up 5 days a week as always. So I want to thank you all for tuning in. I want to thank Schuyler Callihan for taking time. And Giant fans, make sure you keep it here. We'll have a recap of Hard Knocks episode number 2. That's coming up. We will have a special guest coming up later on the show, which will be the showrunners for Hard Knocks. So we'll go a little behind the scenes and find out why certain things made the cut. So that's coming up. Lots of good stuff here on the Locked On Giants podcast. So thank you for listening. For Schuyler Callihan, I'm Patricia Chena. And Giant fans, we will see you again tomorrow.